Right, welcome in. My name is Chad, and this video is about the disassembly, refurbishment, and reassembly of these. They're my military gauges from a September of 1952 M38A1. Now, this video is just simply it's just a record of what I did and how it went for me. It doesn't mean that it's the only way to do it, and in fact, it doesn't even mean it's the correct way to do it. It's just the way that I did it. And I hope that maybe you can glean some tips and tricks from this video, and hopefully it helps you in your project as well. So with that, let's just get started. So here's the general things that I'll be covering in the video as far as the ring bezel removal, the complete gauge disassembly, lens cleaning and polishing, face character repainting, the housing repainting in a faux yellow zinc color, and then the reassembly of the gauges, and then finally some project end notes. Now the first challenge is to remove that this ring that is crimped on that forms the seal for these gauges. It's just this metal bezel. So to do that, I'm going to clamp it into a hose clamp, and I do that so that I don't want any kind of deformation to take place when I'm trying to very gently coax this this crimped edge open. Now I've noticed that on the Stuart Warners, this crimping goes all the way to the end of the housing, whereas on the Albert Champions or the AC gauges, it only goes about halfway. So for these particular gauges, it's a lot easier to work with than the Stuart Warners. When I did pry off a bezel with the Stuart Warner gauges, I tried with my screwdriver and it wasn't exactly quite working. So what I ended up doing was I found this little, it's actually a soldering iron tool set at the depot, and I had to file it a little bit thinner than it normally would have been. You can see there, and that allowed me to get up behind that crimp and pry it off. Again, that's on the Stuart Warner gauges. Another thing I'll mention is when you are prying this with your screwdriver on the smaller gauges, these lights are really tiny, so you don't have to really worry about prying against the plastic that forms that housing, the windows in there. But when it comes to the speedometer, if you're trying to coax your ring off the speedometer, you want to be careful about prying against the lights because the screwdriver wants to get in there and really apply some leverage to that. I don't know what this is. It's like it's a plastic, but is it like a polycarbonate from the 50s? Who knows? But anyway, so you just want to be aware of that. But let me get it set up and we'll start. All right, so I've removed the mounting bracket and the Douglas connectors that were on here. So now I'm just simply going to get a screwdriver in here. This one's got kind of a rounded edge to it. Notice that the sharper the edge, the better. I don't know, if you had a sacrificial screwdriver, maybe you could file it and make it a specialized tool just for this. But it hooks really easily underneath this particular lip, again because it's the Albert Champions. It's not up right up against this face, so this is actually really easy. So I just give it a little bit of pressure and just kind of move it up in a slight prying motion. And if you notice, I've got my hose clamp. It's not exactly to the top, or the gauge is not set right on that edge, and I don't think that it necessarily needs to be. It's close, but not exactly, and it's just close so that I could work in there. But I'm being careful of the lights, not to pry onto that plastic so that it'll crack. So I'm just kind of working around really nice and easy. Oop, and it's popped out, so that's fine. All I do is just simply reset it. There we go. And I can kind of rotate it slightly. I found that I don't like to work real close to this turnbuckle or whatever it is, this set screw thing. So, oops, just one jumps out of there. So notice the higher to the edge I put it, that it wants to jump out of the hose clamp. So I just kind of put it in there with some depth to hold it. And again, the reason for the hose clamp is because I don't want, when I'm prying this metal apart, I don't want there be any chance at all that it's going to deform that outer edge. Because even though when I go back to reclamp this ring into place later during the reassembly, you know, it's not going to be a perfect rolled edge like it was from the factory, but I'll get it close enough. And then, of course, when it's installed in the dash, it'll look great from that side. It doesn't want to do it, so just going to try to move that out a little bit further. Now I realize I don't have my hose clamp on there, but I'm not really putting a lot of pressure on it. I'm just enough to just kind of widen it out. So I'm just trying to get that ring to the point where it'll just slide right off the gauge. And it's starting to wiggle on me. Oh, here it comes. I think I'm close. And kind of push it off there. It wants to do it. I did find that this is to open paint cans, and I found that it actually works pretty well to just kind of coax it. So just kind of widen it out, just so I can slip it by. Close. Again, I'm not in a big rush here, and I'm just trying a bunch of different little things that'll just allow me to move this ring past and just have it pop right off. I did have this little electrical tape roll that I had found was the right size, and I just kind of use it to hold the gauge face. Oh, there, see it? It pops right off. Okay, that's it. So now that I've got the ring off, what I can do is I can come back with a pair of little flat pliers, and I can just kind of clean up my edge and move it out a little bit more, but with a nice flat pair of pliers, so that it makes it a little bit wider, but I'm also supporting it, because again, I don't want to deform that outer edge of the ring, but I want to get these as vertical as I can. This polycarbonate, I guess, little lens in here, it's sealed down. There's a rubber seal right on the bottom, and it forms a seal. Now it's kind of like stuck. So what I'm going to do is take a pair of pliers, channel locks, and I'm just going to very gently just kind of rotate it to break that seal. There it goes. And that allows me to pull that plastic piece out. Now this plastic piece, you can see oh, there it goes. It's shattered and cracked. It's no good. So, which is too bad, but that's okay, because that's why I bought this gauge, is to just play around with it. All right. So now inside there is the seals, which I got to pull out. Oops. for the Douglas connectors. This one. Come on, you. There we go. And underneath the seals are a couple of nuts. So what I'm going to do is put a couple bolts in here just as leverage, and then just kind of put a little pressure on it, and that should, oh, there we go. Got to be very careful. And let's look at the mechanism here. I mean, these aren't that complicated of a little thing, right? They're just this little mutual induction magnets essentially that just move this needle over. You know, it might be good, it might not. It's hard to say, but it's kind of cool. So anyway, there's the inside. You can see the washer that acrylic housing was attached to, and then you have this little thing, which I think is a desiccant container. So I think this is a cap. Let's have a look here. Oh yeah, and it's got some desiccant powder or capsule, or not capsules, but little granules in there. So that's just to keep it nice and the humidity nice and even on the inside of the gauge. And so what it can actually do is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the modern equivalent of that you can find in pretty much any shoebox or purse. You know, ask your wife or whatever, and she'll be able to give you those little silica packs. I'm going to open them up and pour it in there, and then I'll just put the cotton back on there, and that will refreshen that. All right, so now I'm going to go over to the wheel and clean this up. Well, so much for that. All right, so I tried to polish up that acrylic lens, but it disintegrated because it was in such bad shape. But what I wanted to show you was that it shines up really well and it polishes up super well. This is one of my lenses from my original gauge, and I mean, it looks fantastic, but it really does work. All right, so I was hoping to get a couple more usable parts out of that. And the same is true for this ring. I'm just going to hit it with the wire wheel, and you know, we'll clean it up. Okay, so here's the ring. You can see it cleaned up really well. You know, it's got some paint left on it, but it's just an example. So on my other gauges so far. And so here's the Speedo, and it's got the lens. You can see from the before picture, you know, it cleaned up real well. The rubber seals look super good. Here's the inner housing, and the silica pack that was in it, which is, here's the original. You know, I got one from, you know, like I said, a pair of shoes or a purse or something like that, and it fit perfectly in there, and that's going to be a great replacement. And then here's the outer ring. So I just got to reassemble and try to crimp that edge into place, and we'll go from there. So here's my second gauge. It's just a sacrificial gauge. So I'm going to just try it without the ring and see what happens. See if there's as much deformation as I'm afraid of, or if that's just something that I've built up in my mind. So we'll see here. And of course I can, you know, I mean, again, this is just a gauge that I don't mind destroying, so it's not really a problem on on your gauges, and I guess on my gauge, you know, I'm not interested in even taking a chance. But it doesn't seem like it's really having a problem on the outer edge there. just slip it past. Looks like it's going to for me. Maybe. Get my trusty holder. There we go. Here it comes. Yeah, not bad. Ooh. Yeah, that's good. I was hoping to get a decent ring or a seal there. Okay, so once again, to loosen up the lens, just very, very gently, just move back and forth, break that seal. There we go. Okay, so this lens is in much better shape. So you can see what shape it's in. You can kind of see that it's, it's not very clear and it's got a lot of corrosion on it. So I'm going to go over to the wheel and I'm going to clean it up and we'll see what the difference is after that. Okay. That's not bad. You can see it's a lot clearer. Looks pretty good. There's a little bit of discoloration. Here's my original. And you can see the difference, especially on edge. Yeah, that one's got kind of a yellowish tinge to it. This one really doesn't have that. It's a 70-year-old gauge. But I don't know, that's pretty good. I'll just set that to the side. Okay, so that ring cleaned up real well. It looks good. They both look really good, actually. And what I can kind of do is just come through here and, oops, and just kind of straighten this up. And again, this is without the hose clamp to support it. I don't know. I mean, I guess it could be done, but if you're, impatient or in a hurry or just don't have a hose clamp or whatever, but me being paranoid about, not messing anything up, I definitely would use the hose clamp or suggest it. But it seems to be fine. I can't really tell the difference between the two. Just trying to get that lip to be vertical-ish. Straighten it out a little bit also, so it's not so rough. But I don't know, on closer inspection, boy, that looks real good. And this is with the hose clamp. I mean, I can't tell the difference. So who knows, maybe I'm just being paranoid, which I probably am. But, okay, so the first challenge for us was to get this ring off, which it's not so scary now that we've done it. And this is the second gauge that I was messing around with. The face on this looks a lot better than this one. I don't know, something happened to this one, but it doesn't really, I don't know. It shows it, but it doesn't show it at the same time. Let me pull this housing, or the gauge out of the housing. 1 second. Pressure and push it through. There we go. Being very careful, delicate instrument. All right, there it is. Looks good. The second challenge for me is on the little ammeter thing here, and also the fuel gauge and the speedometer, of course, is you can see the discoloration, and that is, of course, the iridium paint that has faded over time. I'm pretty sure it's iridium, the glow-in-the-dark paint, right? And and I know maybe some of you are saying, "Oh my gosh, you know, he's got that exposed, and you know, here he is working right around it." But you know, I'm not sanding this, I'm not scraping it, I'm not doing anything, and I'm not licking it clean or anything. So, and I think that there's plenty of other stuff that's going to kill me dead long before the exposure to this slight amount of glow-in-the-dark paint that's on this dial face. So, I'm not concerned about it. But so what I'm planning on doing is to repaint this white, and then I have some glow-in-the-dark white paint that I'm going to go over the top of that with and essentially reset it. Now, I know that's ambitious, but you know, what the heck. And especially, you know, these are big numbers here and graduations. This is like super tiny and and you know, really sharp lines, and I think that's going to be a challenge, but you know, I made it this far and I think I'm up to it. I went to my local art supply store and I bought some super fine brushes, and I bought some enamel to paint it with. This would be flat white, and I also bought some thinner to thin it out. So that, and here's the glow-in-the-dark paint, the white that I bought. And I also bought something to go with it, because this is a water-based acrylic. The other one is an oil with a thinner. I bought this Faux additive that will break up the surface tension of the acrylic paint so that I can get a really nice, super tight line with it. And I bought an assortment of brushes, so that'll be the next challenge, is to attempt to repaint that. Who knows how it's going to go? I'm sure it'll go great. So the other thing with the speedometer is, besides the painting on the face, is that it could be remagnetized. And there's a magnet in here that when the cable is inserted in the back, it spins a housing which pulls on a spring, which, you know, allows the needle to move without, you know, as a relative motion to the speed of the device. So I got a simple magnet which allows me to determine the north and south pole of my speedometer, and then I'm going to attempt to remagnetize it, just strengthen up that field. It's a little tricky, and you know, I think it is possible to mess it up. It's not possible to reset those poles, to like over magnetize it, but it is possible, I think, to weaken it by doing it wrong. So I have to be careful of that. But that's for another time. Okay, so here I go. I am jumping right in, and I'm attempting to paint the browned out areas on this fuel gauge. And I'm tackling the fuel gauge first because I don't know, why not? It's the hardest, and I figure if I can do this, then everything else is going to seem super easy. You know, I'm already breaking the rules of fine detailed paintwork, which is being in a relaxed position. I'm not, you know, I've got my hands and my arms resting on the workbench. Oh shoot. And also you want to breathe when you're doing this, and I'm not doing that. I'm holding my breath because this is super scary. So I'm kind of taking advantage of the fact that the lettering is raised slightly, because the paint kind of tracks along it, and so do the bristles of the brush. And the speedometer. Now the speedometer should seem easy by comparison. Okay, so I'm looking to duplicate this. I'm looking to duplicate this yellow zinc coating that's on this gauge. So I found that if I just very, very lightly apply some gold to it, I can duplicate an effect which is very, very convincing. But it's just an extremely light buildup. And I'm not concerned about corrosion protection because I'm going to come back through and hit it with a clear, which will do the corrosion protection for me. I'm just kind of just very gently building it up until it reaches what I think is the correct, like, saturation, I guess. Compare it to my other ones. Do just a touch more on this one. Gotta be careful to be consistent. When they're compared side by side with the actual zinc chromate, it looks really convincing. It's a good faux finish. But again, the secret is to build it up. Because I've seen online some people complain that they buy what is sold to them as zinc chromate paint to duplicate that finish, and the complaint is, well, it's just gold paint. And yeah, you're right, it is just gold paint, but it's how it's applied that is the secret. Okay, and once again, here's my original. It's pretty good. Now I have a mirrored finish essentially underneath this as a base, and I treated it with a rust preventative treatment, which gave it a little bit of a splotchy kind of look, which is, perfect, because that's how it looks under the chromate, right? It's the treatment of the plating process. Slightly do the inside just to give the impression that it's there, but I don't want to be overwhelming. I think that's where people get into trouble. Get a little overwhelming. Just want light touch, just the impression that something's happening. So here was my original tester, and it's lighter than the ones I just produced. It's not much lighter, it's like a shade difference. So what I'm going to do is, but this is like right on to the original piece. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to just swath over it just a little bit with silver. And that's just going to lighten it up. It's going to add a little bit of sparkly depth to it. It's going to give it a little dimension. But this, again, is just a cloud of silver that is just going to just pass through. That's good. All right. All right, so here they are. And you know, when these things look really good in direct sunlight, they look fantastic installed, and they look fantastic in the shop, just like they are now. In fact, this is the NOS gauge clip right here. Couldn't even really tell just by looking at it. And here's the NOS gauge. So, you know, I'm really happy with the way these turned out. Sure, this has, the original has a rainbow effect in it that you're just not going to get without the anodizing. But no, I'm really very pleased with the way that the finished product here. So, and again, that's a polished steel housing with a very light coat of gold paint on it, and an extremely light coat of silver just to give it a little bit of depth. And I ran it over with gloss. That's the original anodizing inside, you can tell, but it's very, very, very close. Good faux paint. Anyway, a gloss coat over the top to make it corrosion resistant. So there you go. I saw a tip online about a way to crimp this ring down. It had to do with a pair of pliers with some electrical tape or something to protect, you know, the finish on the ring. And so I tried that. But what actually ended up happening was I had dented the ring slightly, and which, you know, it ruins it essentially, in my opinion. So I thought of a different method to do that, and I have this piece of rubber, and I cut out a ring or a space for it so that it can fit in there. And then I put a piece of steel here, you know, just holding it, and that will allow me to distribute the weight of the force of the pliers. So I'm still using the pliers, but this will allow me to not dent this face of the ring. But before that, I have to assemble this gauge. And so what I've done is I've taken some silica that I got from shoes or whatever, and desiccant, and put it inside the little silica capsule container, put a cotton plug on it. I'm checking the fit here to make sure that that this face and this face on the gauge's step are lined up. Between the Stuart Warner and the Albert Chamberlain gauges, sometimes this lens, I've noticed, is a little bit different height, and so I just want to make sure that this is a good fit, which it is. So originally this had some it had some bushings on here, or grommets, and but they were a really tight fit that made the seal on the gauge. And so what I'm doing instead is I just got some O-rings that once it fits in place, it allows for the insulation between the pin and the housing of the gauge, and so that it doesn't stand any chance of touching and grounding out. And so I'm just going to put that in there. Inside the housing are some index pins here, and on the gauge are the corresponding notches. The desiccant capsule goes on top to clear this edge. Just going to place it in place. Very careful. Try to seat it. That's good. It's a nice level from the gauge face and the lights. Make sure that there's plenty of room there, so I know that it's seated. It feels good and solid. You can see the O-ring inside there, so that's nice. The pin's in the center. I'm going to do a washer on top to complete that seal, and then a solid washer over that compresses and holds the gauge in place. 10mm. Just happens to fit. All right, just check it. Checking the face, make sure there's nothing I don't want on there. Make sure the needle is not touching. Got a nice sweep. Okay. Get my faceplate, and I want to look in the faceplate here for any possible imperfections or weirdness that maybe I can position in a certain way so that it's minimized on this gauge. This face looks really good. Everything looks great. So I'm just going to seal it slightly. Just a little bit of silicone sealer. Don't need a ton on there because I'm just looking to when that makes contact with the rubber to just offer a little bit of assistance. So it's just a teeny tiny bit of sealer. Once again, check the face, make sure there's nothing on the inside of it, because once it's sealed up, it is sealed up. Looks good. Very carefully just place it into place. Okay. Very good. Now this ring, just pops right on there. I could maybe bend this out just a little bit more, but see if I can get away with it. Yeah, looks like I'm gonna have to right there. It's a little touch that's sticking out. All right. There it is. I guess. Okay, I got my custom mount thing here. It just kind of pops in there. All right, now I'm going to use this just punch. And I'm just going to try to roll or start to roll the edge over. And I'm just turning it around to do opposite sides, and I don't know if that's necessarily necessary, but I mean, that's how we do everything, right? Whether it's case nuts or bolts, you know, and head bolts, we always try to do it as evenly as possible. So I'm just going to try to continue that thought process here. It makes sense to me, and there's no reason not to do it that way. I don't really need this on there anymore. Didn't really work for me anyway. Okay. Now I'm applying a nice even pressure on the bottom with my plate. And I just go through and, oops, just go through and lock it in place. Looks like I'm going to have to go through and touch up the housing on this one as well. I was kind of using the bottom of the gauge here. So all the bottoms have this little notch in it, so I was maybe using that as a starting point. Okay. Yeah, that looks really decent. Like I said, I'll go through and I'll just touch up the finish here. Not only just because it looks better, but also just corrosion issues. All right, so that's my fuel, and there's my little ammeter. You can see it's got a good face alignment with the lights. And if you notice, like I was telling you, that I've got this little deformation, little mark in the face of the gauge. It just wouldn't come out, so I kind of put it in a position that I thought would minimize its appearance at least a little bit. All right. And this is the NOS gauge. I'm going to call that looking good. Now, as far as end project notes are concerned, keep in mind that all of my gauges were working when I pulled them out of the rig, so I didn't do any repair, and I don't think it's possible to repair these gauges per se. The only other thing I did with the speedometer is I just made sure that the input was turning freely with some penetrating oil, make sure it spun nicely. I also re-magnetized the magnet inside the speedometer, and this is a diagram of how I did that. Part A is a handheld compass that I determined the poles of the speedometer magnet and also the strong magnets that I was using. And then I just simply used a steel probe to attach to the north pole of the strong magnet to the south pole of the speedometer magnet, and then on the other side from the north pole of the speedometer magnet to the south pole of the strong magnet on the top. And what that does is it just kind of reinforced the direction of the magnetic field inside the speedometer magnet. And then I kind of spun it with the drill set on reverse to just make sure that the action was nice and smooth. And it seemed to work just great, and I don't think it's going to hurt it, and it's going to just help. So those are the only real things that I did mechanically on these gauges. Okay, so here it is, the big conclusion. The gauges are finished and completely disassembled, refurbed, and reassembled. I'm really happy with the way they turned out. The most intimidating aspect of this project, besides painting the numbers and on the speedometer, and also the fuel gauge, and also this battery charge and discharge gauge, were just the removal and replacement of those rings. But I tell you, as I've shown you, it's not that bad. And honestly, this set of gauges, to have them professionally redone, is easily $1,200 to $1,500. And I don't really keep track of costs and time on this project, because this is something I just do for me. But I know you're watching the video, so I spent about $100 on this, and I think they turned out really, really well. By the way, do you happen to remember which one of these is the NOS gauge? It's the pressure gauge. So I don't know, I think they turned out pretty damn good. I would encourage you to give it a go, and best of luck.